roots of the Great March on Washington, of course, go way back to the 1930s in A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph might be best known as the head of a union for the sleeping car porters, a man who was battling against segregation inside organized labor in this country, in the United States. I think one of the things people often forget is what a tumultuous period precedes and follows the Great March on Washington. Because right before, you have Dr. King in Birmingham, Alabama. You have the letter from the Birmingham jail in April of 1963. You have those tremendous clashes with the vicious dogs and the fire hoses on young people in Birmingham, the jails clogged with people. And President Kennedy is concerned enough that in, I believe it's June of 1963, he goes on national TV and talks about civil rights for the first time as a moral issue. It's an incredible speech because remember, Kennedy is someone seen by Dr. King as, and I think this is the exact quote, inadequate or insufficient with regard to civil rights. You know, a guy from Massachusetts, not really in touch with the racial divisions in the country. And here he is in the White House, and he has promised to get involved, promised to do things, not followed through. They've deluged his office with pens to try to get him to sign housing legislation that he promised. Never happened. But here he is now in the aftermath of those incidents in Birmingham on TV saying if we are a beacon of freedom to the world, if we talk about human equality and democracy, well, how is it that here at home we have caste and we treat the Negro, this is his language of the time of that period, how is it that we treat the Negro as a second-class citizen? So it's just powerful. And it's for the first time that you see King publicly complimenting John F. Kennedy as president on civil rights. And then you get, and it's only then that you get President Kennedy, whose top black aide was a man named Louis Martin, who had been publisher of the Michigan Chronicle. So his top aide with regard to civil rights is Louis Martin. It's only then that you get the president, the White House, Louis Martin saying, okay, we buy into this, we're going to try to support it, but you guys have to then make sure that it's an interracial protest. And they excluded politicians. I think that's one of the more interesting things is I cover Washington politics now. And to look back on the March on Washington and realize that Adam Clayton Powell, who was then a leading light in terms of black and civil rights legislation on Capitol Hill, he's excluded because they don't want politicians. They arranged to have it on a Wednesday, in the middle of the week. Why? Because they didn't want people staying over for the weekend or coming early before the event. I'm reminded of some of the people who came on the buses with their children, that people got on the bus, late at night or very early in the morning in order to get here at the crack of dawn when the bridges would be open to allow the buses in. And they talk about being on those buses and singing gospel songs that for many of them, especially for the older white, especially Jewish participants, was like, oh my God, this is inspiring and we have not had this experience. Stop and look at the difference that march made in terms of the perception of the civil rights movement nationally, the power it had in terms of gaining support for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, President Johnson picking up the baton from President Kennedy and speaking out and saying, again, in another nationally televised address, we shall overcome.